Welcome to the chaos sector. Let's take a moment and point out a few key inquiries from our audience. They deserve mention. We won't highlight anyone, but I'm sure they will recognize their comments. Paraphrasing, quote, how does the killer know that none of the 6 people inside didn't have a gun? He just went in with a knife? Unquote. Good question. For Kohberger to go in with a knife, he would have had knowledge of the setting inside the home. And this spans beyond him, because there would have to be someone from the inside to give him that information. Does anyone have a weapon, like a gun?
No, we don't have any guns. We hate them.
What about other defensive tools, such as pepper spray or tasers?
Yeah, we all have pepper spray, just in case.
Alright, so when will this happen?
Next month, but I think maybe we should drug them also.
That's a good idea. It can be done faster that way.
But then, what about me?
What do you mean? Just stay in your bedroom, and everything will be fine. Listen, nobody will know, except you and Blondie. She's not gonna say anything, right?
I don't know. It's kind of freaking me out now. Maybe, I'm having second thoughts. I mean, what if something goes wrong, like, what if you, or, what if somebody was to, you know?
Hey, don't waste my time. This was not my plan. I'm the one risking everything. Just stay calm, and nothing will go wrong. Stay calm, alright? Do you have drugs?
I just want to make sure I'm clear, and my friend. We can't go down for this. I have a lot I want to do in life. So I want to make sure I'm clear of everything. I am not going down for this, okay?
If you do as instructed, you won't have a problem. It's gonna be early in the morning, right? So you will just pretend you and your friend was asleep. Wait till everyone goes to bed, unlock the door, I come in, and do the job. It's simple.
Easier said than done. I feel bad though. Yes, I can do it. But we have to end all contact after this. Don't call me, and I won't call you.
Won't have to worry about that, as long as you stick with the plan. Because if you don't, we may have problems. You understand?
Yeah, I understand. I just want to be left alone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Got a bit carried away. I was literally inside the plot. If Kohberger is the killer, then he is the scapegoat. For one person to enter into a home with a knife, not knowing if there are guns in the home, is suicidal. Just because they are young, and considered, quote, delicate, doesn't mean they don't have protection in their home. In fact, that is a great reason to have protection in their home, right? The only way he would have the courage to commit those murders with a knife, is he had to know for certain there was not a gun in the home. That's a great question, which further proves there was more than one person, who did in fact, have knowledge of that home, and the individuals inside. Quote, the call about the unconscious person, was DM herself. When she went to call 911, she was hyperventilating and passed out, so the person, or one of, she had called to come over, finished the 911 call, and they told them that there was an unconscious person. DM was the unconscious person. Unquote. Are you suggesting that Mortensen passed out, while calling 911? Why didn't she pass out when she discovered the dead bodies? You are implying that she was in the process of notifying dispatch that there were dead bodies, right? So which one makes more sense here, Mortensen passing out upon discovering her dead roommates, or calling 911 to notify them about it? Come on, let's be honest. Come to think about it, you're focusing on the wrong thing anyway. You should be inquiring about why did it take so long to call 911. Who cares if she passed out, the question is why did it take so long to notify the authorities? And you just slipped up, here's why. Claiming that Mortensen passed out upon calling 911, means she was calling to report her roommates had been murdered, right? If it took approximately 8 hours before this call, this means there is a time frame in which they had already discovered the dead bodies. Mortensen claimed to have gone to sleep, after witnessing the suspect leave the home, right? The suspect leaves the home around 4:30 a.m. If we subtract 8 hours from the time they called the authorities, which was around 12 p.m., what do we get? About the same time, of 4:30 a.m. Which means, Mortensen couldn't have been asleep, she had woken up around 4 a.m. She's not going back to sleep for some time, especially after experiencing a creepy individual walk right past her, right? So logic suggests that Mortensen discovered her deceased roommates within the 5 a.m. hour. We went over this already, just adding more context. She never passed out, it was all to justify not officially reporting that they discovered dead bodies. Let's not deflect from the obvious. Let's be honest here, they quote, discovered dead bodies, called friends over, contemplated how to rationalize everything, and finally, called the authorities after a logical scenario was generated. Once the authorities arrived, their main focus is the dead bodies, and all the survivors have to do is stick to their accounts of what happened. From the same person, they have a lot to say apparently. Quote, I'm so curious why you all believe it's suspicious for LE to not have released surveillance footage to the public. Why would they? Letitia enforcement doesn't release evidence to the public when there is a trial to be had. LOL. Unquote. Incorrect. What has happened is a man has been slated guilty until proven innocent. And since this is reversed, the way the investigation goes about will also be reversed. Nothing they would release will compromise a trial's verdict, because they have already released the most devastating evidence against the suspect, and that's his DNA found at the murder scene. Everything else is arbitrary, and does not have the impact as DNA found at the murder scene. A trial is to try the suspect on the charges against him, accompanied with the evidence to support that charge. The prosecution's main piece of evidence is in fact the alleged DNA found at the murder scene. Essentially, if this is his DNA, he would be considered guilty of murder. The prosecution and the Letitia enforcement has all they need to convict. Nothing else would determine one's fate more than DNA found at a murder scene. In other words, them not releasing, say, I don't know, surveillance of him near that home, to the media, doesn't take priority over DNA found in the home. Although visually, it may be more revealing, it doesn't have the same impact as Kohberger being physically present in the home, based on DNA discovered on a knife sheath in the victim's bedroom. Are we on the same page here? Does anyone think there is greater evidence than that? That other evidence is in fact surveillance footage. This surveillance footage has already been reported on, such as Kohberger's presence in that neighborhood months prior, and ultimately the night of the murders. Might as well release that surveillance to the public. You've already provided that information to the media, right? The mainstream news has already reported on Kohberger being in that area, by way of surveillance footage. Where did the news get this information from? You guessed it, the very authorities. If they were holding this for trial, they would have kept this information from the media, right? They don't have any surveillance footage, that's why it hasn't been produced. It's not because they won't release it to the public, they don't have it to release. I don't think this person understands this point. If you claim they won't release all evidence, you are implying that they have evidence that trumps the evidence of DNA found at the murder scene. And you and I both know, there is no evidence that will take priority over that. Unless they release surveillance of Kohberger literally exiting that home, at the same time the murders took place, they have nothing worth holding back. And whatever is being held for the trial, trust me, is all circumstantial evidence. I guess this is what the viewer is so adamant about referring to. It sounds like a reluctant acceptance, that they actually have no empirical evidence to charge their suspect with. Quote, I question whether a strict vegan would work as a DoorDash driver. The odor of cooked meat would be objectionable, and it would linger in the vehicle. Unquote. I would agree, if Kohberger was vegan, I think that might be a bit objectionable. It's the timing that brought about that theory. What are the chances that Kohberger comes back to the home at 4:04 a.m., and the DoorDash delivery had just been there at 4 a.m.? This window is literally right on top of each other, to where Kohberger would damn near be approaching the home, as the deliverer is leaving, right? And if we factor in the surveillance from the gas station, alleged to have been Kohberger, who would be heading back to the home, doesn't this appear to be the DoorDash guy? He would arrive at the same time, right? It's always going to be a justifiable theory, based on the small window between the two. Remember, they can't reveal this, because it destroys the entire case, and trial. In fact, that might be a significant element of this case. Someone else mentioned the vegan aspect. Quote, you absolutely speak my mind. Something very fishy about this. I also have this gut feeling that Brian is being framed. He does not fit the profile of somebody who would brutally murder so many people. Vegans generally do not do blood. Unquote. If Kohberger is vegan, then blood is something that could cause a panic attack. Stabbing humans, as the knife rips through flesh, would remind him of how animals are slaughtered. In other words, he would vomit before even accomplishing a single murder. Even if he was a reformed vegan, the trauma would still cause such a panic attack. That's an interesting point, good observation, and critical thinking skills. Oh no, we have another comment from Damage Control. Quote, it's a bit naive to assume the medical examiner didn't do a toxicology screen. And absurd to imply it is medical malpractice to conceal one from the public, lol. The world doesn't revolve around pretend detectives for views, lol. They don't have to, and shouldn't, give every single bit of evidence to the news nor the public. And to suggest so is absurd, lol. No offense. Unquote. I'm sensing a passive-aggressive individual who is attempting damage control. Let's not make it easier to prove what we've already established. It's not naive to assume the coroner didn't do a toxicology screen, because that very person said it wasn't relevant. And by law, since it's not relevant to the death, or cause of death, then one doesn't have to perform one. Your comments are becoming oppositional, just to be, well, an opposing view. And it's not absurd to imply it is medical malpractice to conceal that screening from the public, because if there is a cover-up, then what do you think a medical examiner is demanded to do? I see you haven't been in the chaos sector before, might need a reality check. The world doesn't revolve around pretend detectives for views. First of all, we are investigators, not pretend detectives. The pretend detectives are the ones that's handling the case. Please, let's keep things cordial. Before I really tell what I think about this case. And, stop thinking we are requesting every bit of evidence. You are distorting our analysis into an extreme version of itself, and then, arguing against that extreme view you generated. They have not released any, I repeat, any, of the alleged surveillance footage of the suspect near the home. At least one should have been released, right? Gas station surveillance was released, which isn't evidence, because we don't know if that's Kohberger. Body cam footage from months prior was released, which technically may be irrelevant to the investigation. Even body cam footage from the night of was released, which is also irrelevant to the suspect in question. Yet, they can't release surveillance from the grocery store of Kohberger. We are not asking for all surveillance to be released, but to keep the media honest, you have to provide the public with tangible evidence of the suspect being linked to the murders in some visible capacity. If not, then the media will start to control the direction an investigation goes, based on their so-called reporting. And once this happens, an investigation becomes a drama series, rather than focusing on the severity of the murders that took place. Do you understand? And we don't do this for views, we do this for informing the public, and people view it. There's a difference. This person has irked me, and they know who they are. Quote, LE can collect evidence all the way up to 6/26/23 for the probable cause hearing, which in this case will be like a mini-trial. If LE described the events to the media in a subversive fashion to protect something, that will come out at full trial, and they'll probably give an explanation for a need to color the dialogue. Unquote. Quote. Yes, someone recommended this channel to me, but he clearly has no training or experience in crime scene investigation. Very naive. Unquote. Do these individuals know what DNA found on a knife sheath is considered legally? I mean, do they know? It is real, I repeat, it is real evidence. Real evidence, or empirical evidence, is evidence that proves a suspect is either guilty of a crime, associated with the crime committed, or at the least, was present at some point at the location the crime was committed. To be honest, there is no probability involved here. A quote, probable cause hearing, is actually a retraction in this murder investigation, because the evidence has already been established. The authorities reported publicly, I repeat, publicly, that Kohberger's DNA was found on a knife sheath in the victim's bedroom. There is nothing greater than this, which is preserved for trial. Everything in trial is arbitrary at this point. Is this thing on? Am I speaking English? I thought I was. Let's break down the terms, so they can understand. Probable means likely to be the case, or likely to happen. Probable cause in this case would be his vehicle spotted in that neighborhood the night of the murders. This aligns with circumstantial evidence. Going back to a previous episode, an individual running out of a store after a robbery is considered circumstantial evidence that they robbed that store. It is probable that Kohberger murdered those roommates, because his vehicle was spotted during the time frame before, during, and after the murders took place. But, it is not real or empirical evidence, because you can't prove without a doubt he murdered those roommates. Empirical evidence, in this case, is his DNA found on a knife sheath in the victim's bedroom. Or, other forms of DNA found at the murder scene. Since his DNA was discovered in the home, in the bedroom of the victim, and on a knife sheath, I would calculate a 95% chance that he murdered those roommates. But if it's just surveillance of his vehicle spotted in that area, without the DNA, it drops significantly, perhaps to 55% chance he murdered those roommates. But, if we combine the two, he's guilty of murder. The point of this breakdown is the focus on evidence, and what is more damaging to the defendant. When the authorities obtain evidence that can convict a suspect, it is released at some point to the public. That evidence has already been released to the public, which is the DNA on the knife sheath. Everything else is supporting evidence of the main evidence, which is essentially procedural in criminal investigations and court proceedings. No one is disputing that the authorities will conceal evidence to be presented in court. We are focusing on key evidence that can't possibly exist to be presented in court later, because the greatest evidence has already been released to the public. That's it, I'm agitated. What does all this mean? It means, anything presented in court is less than what has already been provided publicly. DNA found on a knife sheath is essentially a conviction. The point here, a trial will not reveal anything greater than what has been reported already. If they actually have evidence, such as the surveillance, they would have already provided it. Along with the DNA, Kohberger would be sentenced to the death penalty, and that's that. But because it's basically a colorable trial, you have to sit through the framework. I'm glad they mentioned the term, color. They said, quote, a need to color the dialogue. Unquote. The term color, or colorable, in law, is the appearance of truth. Did you get that? The appearance of the truth. Let's define a synonym for colorable. Specious, something that seems to exist, or be true, but is not real, or true. Such as the claim that there is surveillance footage of Kohberger driving around that neighborhood the night of the murders. Or that he was seen in that same neighborhood months prior, or that he was spotted in a grocery store later the day of, or even, his DNA was found on a knife sheath at the murder scene. This is all specious evidence. It is classified as evidence, but since there is no physical proof of it, it doesn't exist. It's real due to the mainstream media reporting it as fact, by way of what investigators and authorities claim, but it only exists as truth, or evidence, within the ethos. In other words, it's all an illusion until proven to be real. You may say all of this will be presented in trial, right? These individuals are conflating what evidence would be presented in a trial with what evidence is actually used to convict. The evidence required to convict has already been revealed, and that's the DNA on the knife sheath. DNA on the knife sheath. DNA on the knife sheath. If this is all they had, this would be enough to convict Kohberger. Why? Because Kohberger's defense attorney would have to pull off a magic trick to get him out of that pickle of a situation. Once again, everything else is considered arbitrary. I can't stress this enough, yes I can. Since we know at this point, there is no evidence in the actual home other than the alleged DNA found on the knife sheath, do you think the prosecution has additional evidence that will sway a jury to convict? There is no other evidence in the home, because they would have reported that was discovered right along with the DNA. Remember, the FBI investigator claimed they found Kohberger's footprints. So you have footprints, DNA on a knife sheath, that's a wrap. It seems this is all you need, right? Well, if there isn't any surveillance footage, which these individuals assume is being held for trial, that so-called DNA becomes questionable. And guess who's challenging that very DNA on the knife sheath? The defendant. They didn't mention anything about surveillance, cell phone pings, none of that so-called evidence. They went straight to the source, which places one in the home the night of the murders. The most important piece of evidence could be revealed as a frame. And it's ironic, because individuals so focused on a trial must have forgotten it is Kohberger who is to thank for that. He waived any plea bargain, no speedy trial, he is the reason you are even mentioning the aspect of evidence presented in the future. Do you think he would want the prosecution to have more time to build up their case against him? Sure, if he's a maniac. But if he is innocent, that so-called DNA on a knife sheath will be exposed as planted evidence. All physical evidence at the crime scene has been released to the media. The physical evidence is way of forensics, what detectives so-called discovered at the crime scene. But the surveillance is the only evidence that has not been released. And this is what these individuals are referring to in regards to the trial. Trying to raise an argument about law, and the quote, integrity of the investigation, regarding this so-called evidence, is minimal in the scope of what evidence has been established already. Those episodes they criticize have much more important aspects to discuss than how authorities go about releasing evidence. So I guess they have to create the illusion of greater evidence to be presented in trial. But simply put, it's cherry picking, which is a sign of deceptive nature. And this is how you know, it is more about damage control rather than a genuine debate. We're all for debates, but we do not tolerate damage control. This means you have something to hide, something to protect, contrary to truth, facts, logic, evidence. It will be exposed, period. I had to break it down in such a redundant way, because people think there's more to this case, like there is greater evidence that will be revealed in trial. Will they present evidence that Kohberger attempted to contact Kaylee Gonzalez? Will they present evidence that Kohberger stalked her? Will they present evidence that Kohberger was in a grocery store later that day? Will they present evidence that Kohberger was spotted in that area months prior, and on the night of? Will they present evidence that Kohberger's vehicle has traces of the victim's blood in it? All of this has been reported as evidence by the media, who get their information from authorities, and I guess you can include, quote, law enforcement sources. This has been officially, and some unofficially reported in the news. The defense attorney may request a speedy trial for their client, because they are dead in the water, right? And yet, no speedy trial, which indicates that none of that alleged evidence exists. And if none of that evidence exists, this shrinks the focus down to the DNA found in the home. Which is what Kohberger is challenging. Remember, he states that's Not him. If he claims the DNA is not his, then whose DNA is it? Well, it's his, but he wasn't physically there that night. That's strange, right? DNA of the suspect at the scene of a murder, yet the suspect wasn't physically there? I don't think I have to explain how this is possible, again. There's nothing else. They push the guilty verdict to the public, and now they wait to see how that impact will affect the court setting. We will also wait and see. This is the chaos sector.